Well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome. Am I recording? Am I okay? Alrighty. Well, I'm going to talk with you today about the Oneida Indian Nations community, but I do want to mention just one thing. He said you were speaking, or the speaker next week will be from the Oneida Community Mansion House. And the Oneida Nation and the Oneida community had a very close relationship back in the day. So we are actually located very close to the community. So there were many Oneida Nation members who worked at the Mansion House in various capacities, usually as domestics or things like that. But they did have a very strong relationship with the Oneida community. So although they were two very separate and very different communities, they were both kind of oppressed and on the outskirts of society. So they really kind of associated with each other and actually helped each other. So it's interesting that next week you will have that community in here. And hopefully they will mention a little bit about the Oneida Nation because we did work with them a little bit back in the day. But I am here to talk about the Oneida Nation community, and I am also here to answer any questions that you may have for me. I love to answer questions. I would rather do that than stand here and just say a speech to you all. As Colgate students, I know you're all very inquisitive and curious, so I expect some very good questions from you. I will let you know ahead of time. I will pretty much answer any question, so do not worry about offending me or embarrassing me. Do not think your question will be stupid or silly. That is never an issue. I do a lot of presentations at our cultural center with fourth graders. Unfortunately, in New York State, that is the only year that our children learn about the Haudenosaunee is in fourth grade. So that is the grade we focus on at our cultural center. I'm only telling you this so if you think your question is stupid or silly or will embarrass or offend me, a fourth grader has already asked it. So do not worry about that. I am pretty open to questions. Really, if there is a question that I find is maybe too sensitive or too personal, I won't answer it probably, but very rarely does that happen. Pretty open person, and I will share most of my experiences with you. So how do we define community in the Oneida Nation? And this is really a big question. When they asked me to come and speak about this, and I started thinking about, what exactly do we define as our community? And I started to realize that we have a lot of different definitions for this. The Oneida Nation itself is a part of a bigger community, and that is the Haudenosaunee community. In case you are not aware, Haudenosaunee means people of the Longhouse, and that consists of the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and Tuscarora nations. These 6 nations formed a confederacy. Well, 5 originally formed this confederacy many years ago. The Tuscaroras were invited into our confederacy in the early 1700s. But these 6 nations all are located within New York State. And so when we do things, usually we do them together or we do them very similarly. So when you're speaking of the Haudenosaunee religion, for example, that religion is the same throughout those 6 nations. They may have a different language when they speak those ceremonies or when they say those words, but for the most part, the ceremony itself is very similar. So we share in this bigger community of Haudenosaunee nations. So we are a Haudenosaunee first. For a long time, we were known as the Iroquois. The Iroquois is a name that was given to us by the Algonquin tribes. The Algonquins were not our friends, so the term Iroquois is not a friendly name. So we prefer the term Haudenosaunee. However, we are not going to start arguing about it, whether we are the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois. But if asked, we do prefer the term Haudenosaunee. That is a more accurate description of our people, and that is what we prefer to be called. So we are a part of this bigger Haudenosaunee community, and these communities do get together from time to time. One of the main attractions, I guess you could say, that gets everybody together at least once a year is the Great New York State Fair. I know for a lot of people the fair is the fair, and they really don't like the fair. Some people love the fair or they hate the fair. And for Indian people, we love the fair. There is an Indian village at the New York State Fairgrounds. That village was actually more or less given to the Six Nations Agricultural Society back in the 1930s. And so that land, that piece of land that that Indian village sits on inside the Great New York State Fair walls is Indian land. So that village is treated a little differently than the rest of the fair. You go to the village and you don't even feel like you're at the fair anymore. It's completely different. It's probably 20 degrees cooler. It's much, much quieter. There is no alcohol allowed in the village, so you don't need to worry about that. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So when you get to the village, it really feels different. But the Friday before Labor Day at the New York State Fair has always been Indian Day. And on Indian Day, all Indians get in free. So that is really a time when a lot of people will get together and go to the fair on Indian Day. It's more of a family reunion. You get to see people that you don't normally see. But it's a wonderful time because all 6 nations finally get together once in a while. And that doesn't happen a lot, with different things that are going on in different communities. For everybody to get together like that is very rare. So the State Fair is an opportunity for that to happen. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the fair, so I'll just tell you a little bit about our village. And that is a community in itself. So when people are at the New York State Fair Village, they are truly a little community unto themselves. The State Fair is now 13 days long. So a lot of those people do get to the village and they set up their campers and they set up their RVs and they stay there for those 13 days. So it really is a community within the State Fair. But every year, the State Fair or the Indian Village rotates through those 6 communities. So this last year was Onondaga year. And so the Oneida Nation were able to choose the Indian Village princess. They were able to run our soup house, so they prepared all the food in the soup house, and then whatever proceeds they make from their soup house, they get to keep. And so then, the next year it will rotate to a different nation. 1985 was Oneida year, and that was the year I was princess. So my daughter was princess in 08, and the nation had the fair again the year before this one. So last year was Oneida year at the fair. So it's a community within itself, and the State Fair is really a wonderful time for people to get together. We all have the same dances, and we all have the same songs. They may be different words, but the melody is the same in the songs. So you could see the Indian Village, where they're dancing up on the Turtle Mound. And you may look at this troupe, and there's probably 18 people up there, maybe 21 people, or 20, something like that. And you can watch them dance, and you think this is a great troupe. They must practice together a lot, because they are all doing the same exact thing. They must really practice a lot. And then when you realize that these people do not even know each other, and probably have not met each other before, it's amazing. But that is the fact that we all do the same dances. So when we get together, it looks like we've practiced a lot, but in reality, we're just doing the dance we learned at home. So that's another time for people to just get together and dance and learn these old songs and share a little bit about our culture with people. So that's a small community within itself, but it is really the big Haudenosaunee community. Are there any questions so far? I know I can stay in here and talk all day, so people have to really ask me some questions. Yes?
The one that comes to mind most quickly is, what are some of the characteristics that people look for when they choose the princess?
Well, they have to be very pretty. No. Usually when people choose their princess, usually they have to do with, if it's a well-rounded student, are they a good student? Are they in any extracurricular activities? Are they involved in their community? Do they attend events and programs and things? So there's a lot of questions that people ask. Usually people want the princess to be able to dance and make sure she knows all those dances, but that's not a real requirement because a lot of them are pretty easy to learn and they can always learn them before the fair starts. So dancing is not a big, huge requirement. It's certainly a plus, but that's not what would make a girl get chosen. I think it really just comes down to, character and who is choosing the princess. Sometimes, there may be a family member who wants their niece in there or something. But usually the princess, when she's chosen, she's usually a pretty good pick. We haven't really had too many problems with princess not fulfilling her duties or maybe destroying her reputation or something like that. It usually doesn't happen. She cannot have children. The princess has to be between 16 and 22. And I said they cannot have been married or they cannot have any children. So it's pretty simple requirements. There's not a lot of them, and they don't have to be pretty, but that's just, that helps. But there's few qualities and characteristics of a princess. But that's, that's the Indian village princess. Indian tribes did not have princesses. I know I hear this all the time. My great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess. Cherokees had no princesses, so I don't know where these Cherokee princesses came from, but they were not from the Cherokee Nation. So, we do have a princess, but that is really only for the state fair. There is no other. I've gone to other Indian nations where they actually choose a princess, and this girl will have certain duties throughout the nation. She might, speak at a meeting or something. But really, in our community, once the state fair is done, she is really, the princess title's kind of gone. It's really only for the fair. But you can hold it over people's heads for years and years and years, which I did. Anything else before I get started? Yeah.
How large is your community?
Our community, when you say how large, I imagine you mean what's the population. But the Oneida Nation has about 1,000 members. We are not a very big tribe. We're pretty small. We're big enough where we don't know each other's business, but we're small enough where we could find out each other's business if we wanted to. So our community is rather small, but we are scattered throughout the 50 states in the Union. So we have a nation member living in every state. But we do have quite a few members who live down at Onondaga, and then of course we have some that live on our reservation. We started a new community called the Village of the White Pines, maybe about 20 years ago. There's probably about 200 people living there. So we actually have different pockets of people, and that's actually where I was going to talk about here next is in our community of our 1,000 members. We do have several different communities. Like I said, first of all, we have the people who live right on the 32-acre reservation in Oneida. That reservation is actually left over from our bigger reservation. The Dawes Act was passed in about 1872, and that split up all Indian reservations into individual lots. And each one of these lots was given to an Indian person, and that became their land. It was their allotment. And this happened throughout all Indian reservations, and New York didn't escape that. So our reservation was also divvied up into smaller lots than the ones out west. But that lot that we have right now, that 32 acres, was actually one of our chiefs. His name was William Rockwell. That was his allotment. After he passed away, he deeded that back to the nation. And so that is how the nation was able to maintain possession of that 32-acre property. If it had not been for Chief Rockwell's forethought, we would have been a landless nation, such as the Cayugas. They have land, but they have reacquired it. They have no original reservation land. So we're very fortunate in that respect that Chief Rockwell was looking out for his future descendants. So the 32-acre reservation is where I live. And that is where everything was started there. I have lived there since I was about 5 years old. I am now 51, so I have lived there quite a few years. I've seen the nation's progress firsthand. But it's a small community, and everybody cannot live on 32 acres. So we have several different communities. As I said, we built another community about 20 years ago called the Village of the White Pines. And there are quite a few different housing developments over there. We have some townhouses, some rent-to-own houses, and also some, home ownership homes. So there are different houses there, but the village itself is its own community. And then we have nation members who do not live on either community. So maybe they live, in town. Maybe they have their own land and their own house. So we have people who do not live on nation lands either. But then, the nation has reacquired a lot of acreage throughout the years. So we have little communities kind of popping up all over the place where there might be 4 or 5 families living together in one area or on one road or something like that. So we have the bigger community, then we have the smaller ones. But then you can even go even further than that, where the people themselves are divided into different communities. Of course, we have our elders, who we have great respect for and we do a lot of things for. So we have an elders community. We have an elders center where our elders can get together and they have lunch and they do a lot of different programs. They are always going to movies or shows or something. They do a lot of different things with our elders. And then we have our youth. Our youth also have their own community, and they have their own rec center where they get together and do their kinds of things. So we have a lot of different communities within our bigger community. Of course, it is 2017, so we also have a Facebook community. Everybody I know is on Facebook these days, and really that is the way to get information out to our community. So our community has kind of developed a Facebook group on their own. It is a private group, and you have to join this group. You have to be Oneida to be in this group. And so if there is an event or something going on in the community, it will be posted in there, and it's Oneida 411, and so people will actually be able to see what is coming up. So if they're not, living in the community and they can't physically see the poster, at least they can get on Facebook and see what kind of events are coming up. So Facebook is a really good tool, and we use this a lot. Long time ago, when we lived in longhouse villages, the news would travel pretty easily from village to village. We had what are called runners, and these runners were men who were, of course, very good runners, but they had very good endurance, and they would actually run messages from one village to the next. So that was a very efficient way of getting news around, but unfortunately we do not have runners like that anymore. We still have some, but they don't do as much as they used to. So we have to rely on other methods to share information, and Facebook is just a wonderful way to do that. So we've taken advantage of technology on the res, and we are using it to make sure that people get to events. Anything else? Yeah.
What sort of events would be put on?
Okay, well, we hold many programs and services that bring our people together. So, for example, at the Cultural Center, which is where I work at, the Segoe Cultural Center is a museum. Sometimes we have a group of Colgate students actually coming this Saturday. Okay, yeah, we have like 40, 50 students coming Saturday. So they will be visiting the Cultural Center, and they'll get a little spiel like this. It'll be different talk. So we have people come to the center. But one thing that has been going on is at our Cultural Center, we found that we had a lot of people, and in our community, one of our biggest problems is diabetes. I'm not sure if you know, but diabetes is in epidemic proportions in Indian communities. It is just a horrible disease, and because Indian people have not been eating sugar for very long, our bodies cannot process it. And so our bodies have a very hard time with three things: sugar, milk, and alcohol. These are three things that we have not been consuming very long. Our bodies have not been able to build up any kind of immunities to these things, so they are very, very harmful to us. And so for a long time our people have suffered from diabetes, which comes from their diet. We're not used to eating these foods. We're not used to eating bread and these kinds of things. So our people have really gotten obese throughout the years, which also, with this diabetes, it's a vicious cycle. So our community kind of decided on its own to do something about this. And one thing that we do know is that we have got to change our diet. We are not supposed to be eating these things, and so there are a lot of people who are now going back to a traditional diet. The Oneida Nation has Indian corn, which is a little different than sweet corn. It's not sweet, but we use white corn for a lot of different things. Back in the day, we did not have wheat flour, so we used corn flour, and so a lot of our people can't digest wheat. But now they're going back to corn, and so they're making cornbread, but a lot of people don't know these recipes. So we are actually holding cooking classes now in our community. Every Monday evening, people can come and learn how to cook something with white corn. And so that's something that's new in our community. It's brand new, and so people are really enjoying this. So they're going back to this old-time diet of corn, beans, squash, a very bland diet, fish, rabbit, natural plants, and this is really just in hopes of staving off diabetes, and it seems to be working. I am definitely seeing a slimming down of our community, and another thing that's happened in our community that's changed some of this diabetes is the alcoholism in our community has decreased significantly. So I grew up in the 1970s on our reservation, and it was very hard time to be an Indian person, and we suffered from a lot of alcoholism on our reservation. So it's good to see now where people are not drinking anymore. They're putting that down, and that's really also helped with the diabetes in our community. Is if people do not drink as much, diabetes seems to be kept at a distance. So through diet and also through no drinking, the diabetes is actually decreased quite a bit in our community. But the kind of a afterthought or something that came out of these cooking classes that we were not really expecting, but it was wonderful to see, is the women who attend these classes. Just happens to be women, but these women who are attending these classes are actually learning from each other, and they find themselves really looking forward to that class. The camaraderie they've built amongst each other has been wonderful to see. And some of these women are women who really would never have associated with each other before that. Maybe they're 20-year age difference or something. But now these women look forward to seeing each other every week and learning from each other. So this bonding has happened within the women in our community, which is just something we didn't expect to come out of these classes. So I imagine we'll keep the classes going for quite a while, and and they pretty much cook what they want to cook. We don't really tell them what to cook, but like last class they made tamales. This is something that we haven't made in our community in a while. The week before that they made pizza, but they made it with white cornbread, so it was a little different. So they're learning now how to make these old dishes and these old things. Other programs that we hold, we also hold a social dance twice a month in our community. And this is really where we get our people to come together. They learn their old songs, their old dances. If we do not know those things anymore, are we really Indian? So we make sure that we teach these old songs and dances. I don't really mean to say teach, because we do not really teach these things. We hold a social, and if somebody wants to learn how to dance or how to sing, they need to come and they need to watch people do it, and that is how they learn. So we do not teach these things, but we do make it available to people. For a long time, one of our singers was my cousin. His name was Wes, and Wes is a wonderful singer. But he has since moved out to Seneca country, so he's now living in the Buffalo area. So I had to find a new singer. And we had a young boy in our community. I think he's maybe 21 now, but I have literally seen this boy grow up. And he has been attending our socials. He has been learning these songs. So when we were trying to choose a replacement for Wes, he was a perfect choice. And he was so pleased to be asked to sing at our socials. And so we actually did a contract, and we actually took pictures of him signing his first contract to sing at our socials. So he was really, really thrilled to be asked. And he will actually start next social, which will be the first Friday in October. So the social dance is a way to get people together, have dinner, and then do some of our dancing, which is another way we just bring our people together. Any questions? I know I talk a lot. Yes?
How strong is your language still?
Well, our language has, suffered big hit in our community, as with many Indian communities. The boarding school era did a number on our people. I did my master's thesis here at Colgate on boarding schools, so I could stand up here and talk all day. Carol was actually one of my professors when I was here. And so I can speak a lot about the boarding school era. There were some good things that happened in the boarding school era, not very many, but it wasn't all bad. But the language really did suffer. That was one thing we could not do at these schools, was speak our language. And so the children were oftentimes very punished, very severely. So when they got out of the schools and had their children, the last thing they were going to do is teach this language to their children. So we really did lose a lot of speakers. Throughout the years, the Oneida Nation community has kind of been fragmented. Some of our people went to Wisconsin, some of our people went to Canada. So the people who were left in New York really, after a while, ended up with no land. A lot of our people ended up moving to Onondaga, so they may have learned Onondaga language instead of Oneida. For a long time in our community, we attempted to hold classes. Wednesday night at the cookhouse, 6 to 8, we're going to have language class. And we would get some people to come, but it's very hard to learn a language one night a week when you are not practicing this language daily. So it's almost impossible. And so for a long time we struggled with what to do about this. How can we learn our language but learn it quickly? And what we ended up deciding to do was to hire nation members to learn it. We did get some flack from other Indian nations who criticized us, and said, how can you pay your people to learn their language? They should want to do that on their own. They should not need to be paid. And that may be true. But really for us, the issue was it's that important to us and we have the money. So we started paying members to learn the language, and right now we have probably 4 women who are almost fluent in the Oneida language, who are now serving as instructors for the next group of students. I also hear that we have a nation member teaching Oneida here at Colgate, so there may be some students who are learning Oneida here. So we've struggled with how to revive our language a lot. I took the language when I was a young girl. We had language class every day after school at our old bingo hall, and I went there every day and learned language. But throughout the years, then we wouldn't have a teacher, then we would, then we wouldn't. So it's kind of throughout the years, it's been very sporadic learning it. But in the last 10 years or so, it's been a priority for our council to get this language in our community. So it's reviving, it's coming back. But it's going to take a long time. We're not thinking this is going to be something that's going to happen overnight. But at least we have people now speaking the language in our community, which is different than we used to have. If we need to learn how do you say this in Oneida, we don't need to call anybody from Canada anymore. We have our own people now who know these things. So we still have somebody that comes down from Canada once a month to kind of, help them out a little bit, answer different questions and stuff. Because the Canadian Oneidas were fortunate in that sense that they were so remote in Canada. They did not learn any other language, so they were able to maintain their language in Canada. So we actually had to borrow speakers to come down from Canada to teach our women. It's a little bit of a different dialect, but it's the same language, and at this point, beggars can't be choosers, so we will take what we can get. And so right now we are learning Oneida again in our community, but it's taken a little while. It's hard language to learn, especially as English speakers. It's very difficult because, as English speakers, we do not realize how difficult English is to learn. It's a very hard language. And so because it's so different than other languages, the way that it's set up, the way the grammar is set up, the way the verbs are conjugated, it is completely different than any other language. And so if we were French speakers, it would be much easier for us to learn Oneida because the grammar is set up very similar. How I don't know how many of you speak French, but if I'm up here and I'm standing here. If he was here, he'd be standing here. She's standing here. We're standing here. Everybody's standing. When you say this word in French, the ending is not ing for all of those words. Depends who's doing that action. If it's a woman or if it's a group of people or a group of men, it's different. And so that is how Oneida is. It's very similar to the way French or other languages are conjugated. So if we were French speakers, it'd be easier for us to learn Oneida. As English speakers, we have to kind of translate it and then translate it again. It's really difficult. In English, everybody says, this is a blue shirt. In most other languages, they say this is a shirt that's blue. So we have the adjective before the noun, whereas in other languages it comes after. So it's just things like that make it difficult for us to learn Oneida. But we're getting there. It's just going to take a little while. Anything else? Yeah.
I have sort of a corollary to that, but also this question could fit into the stupid question category.
I doubt it, but go ahead.
Do you have your own school system, or do you use the public school system, or is it a combination of both?
All of our children attend public school. The federal government took on the responsibility of educating Indian students a long time ago, and they are going to continue to keep that promise. Our kids attend public school, but we do not pay property taxes or school taxes, so that is an issue. But any school that has Indian students in their population can always apply for grant funding. It's called, I think it's Title VI now, not sure. But it's really a formula grant that schools can apply for to receive funding in lieu of whatever taxes they're not receiving from the local district. We do have some students that go to Manlius Pebble Hill, which is a private school in DeWitt. We do pay for the tuition for those students to go to that school, but it is very competitive to get in there. We used to send about 25 kids to MPH, and it was getting extremely expensive. So we do have about 10 kids at MPH, but most of our kids go to public school. They're either at Stockbridge or VVS or Oneida. But again, they live in Syracuse too, so they're attending Lafayette and all different schools throughout the state. We've talked often about building our own school and starting our own school, but we don't know that we would have the students to populate the school. And also, you know, we certainly can't make it mandatory. So just because we have the students doesn't even mean they would all go there. So, you know, then we get into the whole segregation issue, and if that's something we want to do or something we want to take on. So I think the school is kind of, it's a good idea, but actually implementing it and getting it done is a different story. So I think having our own school sounds like a great idea, but I don't know that we would be able to operate it correctly.
So in the public schools, you sort of implied this by your comment about fourth grade only. Even though there are students from your community in the public schools, there's really no conscious effort to integrate cultural education into those schools, just in fourth grade.
Just in fourth grade.
Which is the curriculum.
At Stockbridge, for a long time, we did have a mentor that was located there. It was actually my sister-in-law. And she would work with the students, and they would do different cultural programs at school. But the club was not just for Native students. You know, they had to kind of let anybody in the club. And it really became obvious that there were issues because, you know, like in our culture, in order to be an enrolled member, your mother has to be Oneida. And if your father's full-blooded Indian, full-blooded Oneida, and your mother is not Indian, you will not be considered Indian in our community. You are what your mother is. And so these children who are born with a non-Indian mother do not have a clan. And so what was going on in this program at the school was she kept doing projects that revolved around clans. And you know, and I kept telling her, stop doing these projects because you're leaving kids out here. And so it was an issue with, you know, because I mean, if they're non-Indian children, they don't have a clan, so why would you do this project with clans? So it was real hard to kind of do a program with just our kids. And some kids were, you know, feeling bad after the class, which was the exact opposite of this program. So she is no longer there. They no longer have a mentor there. But a lot of schools who have a good size Indian population of students usually have a mentor of some sort, paid through the formula grant or impact aid for that position. They do a lot more in fourth grade than they used to, but certainly sometimes they may touch on it in seventh grade, but usually it's just in fourth grade. Yes?
Does anyone else have questions?
I don't know.
No? Alright, so you've been talking about we and the council and stuff, and I'm just wondering what the decision-making process is exactly for at least the community on the reservation, and sort of what's the demographic of people that are in that council, how they get on that council,
Okay.
et cetera.
Well, our government is a non-traditional form of government. The men that we choose to sit in these positions are not chiefs. We call them clan representatives. And so their job is really to be the eyes and ears of their clan. And so we have 3 clans, Wolf, Bear, and Turtle. And these 3 clans choose 3 men to represent them on this council. And they also choose 3 women to represent them on this council. The men serve as clan representatives, and the women are to serve as clan mothers. And really their job is to be the mother of their clan. Unfortunately, in our community, it's so small that we've had a hard time keeping these positions filled. The clan mothers have all of them have passed away, and they just were never replaced. So that's something we have to do. That's on us, and we really have to get that done. I myself am not real interested in you know, choosing clan mothers. Because our communities are so spread out, it's difficult to do that. you know, and so for me, I'd much rather just have councilwomen, you know, that serve alongside the men on council. But, you know, it's not up to me. But, so we choose these men and these women, and so ideally we would have an 18-person council. Right now, I think we have a 4-person council. So it's not full by any means, but these people are really the ones who make the decisions for the people. You know, a lot of our stuff has already been established, and there's already, you know, protocols and policies in place, so there's not a lot of stuff that they need to decide on right now. But there are times when they have to make decisions for our people that are hard decisions that people may not be real happy about, but these are the things that they've been tasked with doing. It's their job to look out for our future, and, you know, sometimes for our own good. And what happened here in our community that we noticed, after we opened Turning Stone, we started making a lot of money. And there were some Indian nations in this country who've opened some pretty lucrative casinos and turned around and started handing a lot of money out to their members. Very famous tribe in Connecticut was handing their members $10,000 a month. We refused to do that to our people because after a little while they found that they were not making as much money as they thought, and they're in dire straits right now. So they had to turn around and tell their members that they could not give them that money anymore. They had to get jobs. These people have been handed $120,000 a year for the last 20 years. Now they're being told to get a job. They have no work experience, no skills, no education. They're in worse shape now than they were before that resort opened. So our council has really been very mindful of handing out huge amounts of money. We know that's not going to help anyone out. So we actually have, you know, it's not a small amount by any means, but it's certainly not anything anybody should be able to live on, what we give our people. And our council found that we had quite a few members who were living on this money. They were not working, they were not going to school. And then they were actually getting very entitled about this money. And so our council made a decision that in order to receive this money, anybody between 18 and 35 years old has got to have a full-time job. Threw a wrench in a lot of people's plans. But we had a lot of 20-year-olds sitting out there doing nothing, and we cannot have that. So it was a real wake-up call for a lot of our members. They did not appreciate it one bit. But this is really a decision that our council had to make that was really in the best interest of our nation. And so we did have a lot of people complained about it. My daughters were both one of them. You know, they loved getting that check every 3 months and not really doing much for it. So now they have to work, and it's created a little bit of a problem. But, you know, we didn't get this successful by somebody just handing us a check. So, I mean, there's a lot of hard work that was involved in building that casino and getting to that point. And so when we have people who are so entitled, we have to remind them of a time when we did not have all this stuff. And so they have to know that this is, you know, this is not something that is theirs. It's not their money until it's in their hand. You know, so that's the thing that we had to teach them is to settle down. They were getting a little bit uppity. So our council had to kind of step in. But we are actually in the process of fixing this because we know that we have to have more people on that council. So that is actually in the works right now. But it's going to be tough. Yes?
I know you said that lineage sort of passes down for women. Have you found that women are more active in the community? I know a lot of you said that the 4 women who are learning the language are...
I think the women in our community are definitely more active. They're definitely the doers. They're the ones that get up and get things done. You know, I'm not saying that our men don't do that, but the women really are the ones who take the lead, and we've always been that way in our communities. You know, even back in the Longhouse Village days, the women were the ones who took care of things. You know, and you have to imagine a Longhouse Village it was much different than we might think of today. The men were not around a lot. You know, the men were away at a hunting camp, or they were away at the fishing village. They were not always in the village. So the women who lived there had to be very independent. They couldn't rely on men to do things for them because there was not a lot of men around all the time. So the women got very independent and very, you know, I'll do it on my own. I don't need anybody to help me here. And that's still in our community today. The women are the ones who really are the the get up and go and we'll get this done kind of thing. And sometimes our men may be a little shy because they're brought up around such, overbearing women. But that's the way it is in our community. And you'll see most of our men are pretty humble. They're humble men. They're not boisterous, manly, macho men. That's just not in our community. They're taught when they're young to be respectful and mindful of who they are. And so we do try to make sure that they remember the women are important. Yes?
First, I just want to thank you for all that you've been sharing with us. I really do appreciate it. But I want to know if you can talk a little about the sharing of culture with non-Native communities, and also if you can talk about building relationships with non-Native communities, Native communities and non-Native build that kind of relationship.
Well, we share our culture with the non-Native community, like at the fair, things like that. If there were students here that wanted to attend a social and see what that's all about, we can certainly arrange that. Actually, a group of students from Hamilton College attended our social last night. About 25 students came. You can't come empty-handed, but come. They usually bring a dessert because we have dinner already prepared. So usually they'll bring something, a dinner or dessert or drinks or something. But that's one way that we share our community with other people. The Cultural Center itself is open to the public, so anybody can come in the Cultural Center at any time and learn a little bit about our people. When we do an orientation or when we have new employees at our casino, we do an orientation at the Cultural Center. So people come there and they learn a little bit about our culture before they start working for us. Actually, for a long time, we did not require the new employees to come to the Cultural Center. They used to get a cultural presentation, but I used to go over to the resort and do that. And I started talking with different people and realized that we had a lot of long-term employees that had worked for us for 10, 15 years who had never been to the Cultural Center. And I found this incredibly hard to believe. And, and I said, well, they need to learn a little bit about our culture. They need to at least be exposed to it one time so they understand they're not working for Turning Stone. They're working for the Oneida Nation. And so we had to kind of change that, and it took a long time, but I finally made it so that they have to come to the Cultural Center for orientation. And so they have to visit it at least once. So that's one way where we share a little bit about our culture. The socials are another. And then these kinds of presentations, I get out and speak to people all the time. I will do these presentations anywhere. I was actually at Hamilton College last week and spoke on the Change the Mascot issue. That's another thing that we're working hard to do on that, that Redskins needs to be changed. So just talking about our culture, sharing it with people, giving people an idea of where we're coming from, I think is what leads to understanding between communities. As far as the Indian nations and non-Indian people, how do we do this? And I think it's just a matter of inviting people to our community to share some of our culture. One event that has been very successful in bringing people together is our Veterans Dinner. There are not a lot, or Veterans Brunch, I think it is. There are not a lot of events held specifically for veterans, dinners, or really there isn't. And so in our community, we started Veterans Brunch maybe 20 years ago, and this thing has grown to be huge. Most of the people that attend that dinner are not Indian, because they're really hungry for something to honor these men and women, and there's really not a lot of big events like that. And so we used to hold it in our Children and Elder Center in our Elders Dining Room. It actually got too big for that, and so we had to move it over to the resort, and so it's now held at one of the meeting rooms over at the resort. It's gotten to be an enormous dinner. There is no charge for these veterans to attend the dinner, and so it's been a really good program, and I think that's one good outreach way. My position is Director of Education and Cultural Outreach, so that's my job, to go out and talk to other groups of people and kind of get some understanding between us about why did we build that casino, what happened there, and I think through sharing things, it's easier for people to understand where we're coming from. And I think that people get this idea, I was doing a presentation the other day and I kept referring to ourselves as Indian. And I had somebody in the audience actually correct me, telling me that I'm supposed to be saying Native American. You know, now that's privilege right there. So I had to tell this person, you know, no, we prefer the term American Indian. I know that Native American has become kind of the politically correct title, but that's really not a very accurate description of our people. And if you're born in this country, you may consider yourself to be a Native American, you know, and who are we to say that you're not? So that term can be ambiguous, it can get people in trouble. If there is ever an advantage to being an Indian person, suddenly everybody's, you know, born in this country, Native American, crawling out of the woodwork. Everybody's got Cherokee great-grandmother was a princess. So if there is ever an advantage to being an Indian, that will happen. The bottom line on that issue is there are some Indian people in this country who do not consider themselves to be American citizens. Citizenship was forced upon Indian people in the 1920s. We are the only group of people to ever have citizenship forced upon them. So there are some Indian people in this country who do not consider themselves to be American citizens. So calling them Native Americans is actually very offensive. So we prefer the term American Indian. We all know Columbus was lost, right? There's not a big deal anymore. I was explaining this to a group one time, and a lady said to me, "But you're not from India." I said, I know. Indian people, no, they're not from India. I'm sure some well-meaning person thought that we were offended, and there could be some that are. But, you know, for us, we all know Columbus was lost. We know we're not from India. We're not confused by this term. So really, American Indian is the term to use. If you want to say Native, just Native. No Native American, just Native is fine. And so, but you know, Oneida is preferable, or Haudenosaunee. So there's many terms that people can use besides the term Native American. Am I done? Is that why you're creeping?
Well, you don't have to be done, but it's customary for us to take a pause at this moment and to thank our speaker. So let's thank you. If you're not in a hurry to leave and people have additional questions, feel free to stick around and talk. Otherwise, I know a lot of you have class, so thanks.
All right, thank you. Well, I did have one more thing that I just wanted to say, where we do have a big deal with our community, and this is funerals. A lot of people, you know, you may have a funeral in your community, you may do it a certain way. In our community, funerals are done a little bit differently. And I'll just tell you, you know, this will be the last thing, so you know, sometimes people will ask me why we have clans. What is the purpose of a clan? Why do you guys need clans? And so this really goes back to longhouse villages, long time ago. When there would be a death in the village, it could sometimes send the village into turmoil and chaos. You know, if it was a prominent person or a child or something like that, the mourning could go on quite a long time. And while people were mourning, they may be neglecting other duties that they're supposed to be performing. You know, and that's one thing we're taught. You have duties to do on this earth, and you're supposed to do your duties. So there would be times when people maybe didn't tend to the crops or take care of their children or, you know, feed their elders. I mean, there may have been times when these things got neglected. And so they had to do something to prevent this from happening. And so what would happen is the men sent 3 women down to spend the night by the river, and they told them to report back to them in the morning the first thing they saw when they woke up. So one woman saw a turtle, one woman saw a wolf, and one woman saw a bear. So when they returned to the village and told the chiefs what they had seen, that they said, okay, you will be the bear clan mother, you will be the wolf clan mother, you will be the turtle clan mother, and it will be your job to take care of your family. And it also came during times of death. So if a person would die from the wolf clan, the turtle clan would come in and prepare all their food, take care of their children, take care of their elders, do their chores in the village, their weeding or planting, whatever they had to do, the clan would come in and do all of that for them. So the family was able to mourn as long as they needed to, but they didn't neglect anything. And in the meantime, the remaining clan would be out taking care of any nation business, attending meetings or traveling to another community or holding ceremonies, whatever they had to do, so that there was no stop in our village or in our cycle and things we did. So really the clan system was developed for times of mourning. And we still do this to this day. So if somebody should pass away from the Turtle Clan, the Wolf Clan still will go to the cookhouse and prepare all of the food for the funeral. So when the family comes, all they really have to do is come into the funeral, come into the cookhouse, sit down, eat, visit with each other, do what they got to do, but they don't need to worry about preparing any of that food. They don't need to worry about cleaning it up afterwards. They don't need to worry about any of that. And so that is one thing that has continued in our community, and that is really one way that we've stayed very strong in that, is that we still do that to this day. Okay, so I do thank you all for inviting me here today. It was wonderful to meet you all. Does anybody have any other questions? I'll pretty much answer anything. Yes?
So you've done a lot of talking about sort of internal pressures, or pressures that are mostly internal. So if you had to say, what would you say is the greatest external pressure on the Oneida Nation today? How would you describe that?
I think, we've had a lot of challenges throughout the years. I think right now the most important thing right now for us, I think, is maintaining our government and maintaining our population. That's one thing that's been real tough for us, is really maintaining our population has been hard. When you start telling people you have to marry an Indian, all of a sudden you're a racist, or you're discriminating against someone. And it's really not a matter of that. It's a matter of a bloodline surviving. And we have to make sure that we are here, 50 years from now. And so I think the biggest pressure on us is really maintaining that bloodline. There are not a lot of Indian people anymore, and so it's hard to find, full-blooded spouses. So I think that's one thing that, for me anyways, it may not even be a priority for other people. But for me and my family is really maintaining that bloodline. It can go away so quickly. And, like in the 1950s and 60s, it was not a good thing to be a person of color in this country. And so a lot of Indian people were told to marry non-Indians. So the pressure has been there since the 1950s. And unfortunately, almost every person in my family anyways that grew up in the 1950s and 60s married a non-Indian person. They did what they were told to do, and they thought they were doing the right thing. Unfortunately, they diluted our blood. And so it really became an issue of, having enrolled children or not. In order to be enrolled in our nation, you must be at least 1/4 Oneida. It must come from your mother, and your mother must be enrolled. So these are not real strict requirements. I mean, the Onondagas will only go to a half. But, it's doable, but people have to be mindful of what they're doing. I've heard people say all the time, well, you can't help who you fall in love with. That is baloney. You certainly can too. And, if you're choosy and you know what your priorities are and you know what you're choosing, this husband for, you're having these children and you are making decisions for these children. And so you have to really be cognizant, is this the right decision that I'm making for my children? My father was not Indian. My mother was 3/4. I'm a math major, so I love to do math. It's very simple math, okay? That's why she kept asking questions. This bloodline can go away so quickly. I'll tell you right now, my great-grandmother was 100% Indian. She married a non-Indian man, a German. His last name was Winder, so my family name is Winder. So my grandmother was half Indian. Okay, everybody's with me? She married an Indian man. So all of her children, my mother's generation, were 3/4. My mother's now said, remember what I said, my mother's generation was more or less told to marry a non-Indian. And she did. So that made me 3/8. Now I am 1/8 shy of being a half. So I'm over a quarter, but I'm not a half. But it came to my shoulders. I either marry an Indian and have enrolled children, or I marry a non-Indian and have non-enrolled children. That quickly is how fast it came. And my sister was not important to her. This was in the early 1980s. The nation had no money. We had nothing going on. And, my sister did not want to marry an Indian. Every Indian man she ever knew was either her cousin or an alcoholic. And she was not going to marry one of them. And she didn't. So her children are 3/16. They are 1/16 shy of being enrolled. So they do not receive health insurance. They do not receive scholarship fund. They do not receive anything like this. So I actually promised my grandmother as a very young child that I would marry an Indian. And so I did, married a full-blood. And my children are 11/16. So my children got a trust fund. My children got, you know, all kinds of things that my niece and my nephews will not have. But we have to maintain this bloodline. It can go away so fast. And if you're not practicing your songs, learning your language, doing your dances, and if you certainly don't look Indian anymore, I mean, there comes a time when you have to wonder, you know, are we even Indian anymore? So we have to make sure that we maintain that bloodline and that culture. You know, I know I've heard people say they're Indian in their heart. No. You know, until you don't get served at a restaurant, you don't know what it feels like to be Indian. Until you know at least 6 people that have had their leg cut off from diabetes, you don't know what it's like to be Indian. And so that really kind of bothers me when I hear people say that they're Indian in their heart, because that's no such thing. You know, we've been through a lot. Until you carry this baggage on you and you know what unresolved trauma is, you have no idea what it means to be Indian. So that's a little bit about what's the biggest pressure on us, probably that. Anything else? I don't mean to end on such a sour note.
I know that this is a question that you could address when you come back for another.
Okay.
vote. But what is the Oneida Indian Nation's ambition in terms of property, which is something that's been an issue around here?
Well, you know, I'm not privy to those decisions that council makes, or those discussions even. But I know that we've made an agreement with New York State that we will not purchase any more than 25,000 acres of land within Oneida and Madison County. So we own about 17,000 right now, so we would be able to purchase about another 8,000, but then we will cap it at that. We will not purchase anything more than that. Try to keep it all within Oneida, but it cannot be contiguous, you know, because there's so many people that own land in between these lots. But we're trying to buy right around there. But actually, the nation has not reacquired any land in probably the last 7 or 8 years.
If we go up Route 46, we see houses there that are presumably properties that are part of the nation's real estate holdings that are emptied. Are those? Does that mean that property is to be turned over to some other use?
If it's been zoned residential, we won't do anything else with it. You know, we follow all zoning codes and everything that
Looks like
anybody
most
else would.
Farmland.
Yeah, a lot of what we've bought is farmland. You know, farmers were having a hard time paying those taxes, and they were in foreclosure. A lot of them were, and so that's how the nation was able to get a lot of this land. You know, we paid fair market value. We never really tried to rip anybody off. A lot of people tried to rip us off, you know, but wanted $1 million for 1 acre or something, you know, but we're not going to do that. But most of the properties that you may see that are farmland or something like that, they're usually just sitting idle. There probably are no plans currently for those properties. You know, it may look like nothing's being done there, but there's plenty of medicines growing there, and there's animals living there, and you know, the property's being used. It might not look like it, but it's being used by the nation. But as far as I know, we don't plan to buy any more right away. You know, we're maintaining what we have right now. Anything else? Well, thank you all very much.